Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Regan. I am the Vice President of the Australia-China Business Council of New South Wales, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here today. I'm also the Chair of the Health Working Group, and I have joining me today Alison Choy Flannigan, who is our new co-chair. And before I introduce Alison more formally, I'd just like to say is that it's great to have these events. As you know, ACBC works with its members to conduct a number of events, and we're very fortunate to have a health working group. We've recently reformed with a couple of new members on that, and we're always looking for topics and matters of interest. So hopefully today will be the start of that, and we have a couple more lined up before the end of the year. But we're going to hear today from Professor Rob Phillips and Owen Zheng on engagement with China post-COVID, and it's a very timely and interesting topic. So before I do that, I would like to introduce my new co-chair, and thank you very much, Alison, for taking on the role. Alison is a partner and leader of health and community at Hall Wilcox. She has over 25 years of corporate, commercial and regulatory experience, specialising in the health, aged care, disability, life science and community sectors. She leads the firm's health and community industry group, and she's also very well published, and she's on the Australia-China Business Council committee and joins me today. So Alison's going to chair today's event. So Alison, over to you. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We have opportunities for questions as we go along throughout the session. So please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer them as well as we can during the afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for the introduction, and welcome to the session on COVID-19 and dealing with China. This is a challenging time, but also we've found with our clients and other organisation that this is a time for opportunities. And we're so lucky today to be able to have interviews with two representatives of companies that have been actively working with China, and they're showcasing Australian innovation, which is really exciting. So the ACBC is super excited to support Australian innovation and trade with China. I'd like to introduce you to Professor Rob Phillips. He's the Executive Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Uscom Limited. He is the inventor and founder of Uscom Limited and took the company to public listing in 2003. Rob has more than 15 years experience as Chairman and CEO of an ASX-listed medical technology company. Rob has successfully engineered the acquisition and integration of two international medical device companies and brought these new products to international markets by establishing a global web of Uscom's subsidiaries and distribution channels. Associate Professor Rob Phillips has a Doctor of Philosophy and a Master of Philosophy from the School of Medicine at the University of Queensland, Australia. He conceived and developed the Uscom 1A device and is the author of over 40 patents in cardiovascular monitoring and ultrasound, and has spent over 20 years collaborating, teaching and lecturing in China. Owen Zheng, Director, Morrison Innovations, is an entrepreneur, venture capitalist and project manager. Prior to his current role with Morrison Innovations, Owen has worked for New York and Hong Kong dual-listed medical device manufacturers, as well as an Australian private and public healthcare providers. Inspired by Australia's exceptional R&D capacity, Owen co-founded Morrison Innovations in 2017. In early 2020, Owen successfully attracted private investment to establish HygieMed Australia, a company specialising in an innovative range of medical consumers and personal protective equipment. Owen is now working with the medtech community to bring more innovative technologies and devices into the market via strengthened domestic and global supply chain. I'm going to interview Rob first. If you have any questions for him or Owen, please feel free to add them into the Q&A and we'll deal with them later on. But I've got some questions of Rob. We've heard so much about the COVID-19 vaccine, but let's talk a bit about COVID-19 treatment. And also let's talk a bit about post-COVID-19 symptoms. There's not been much discussion about what symptoms people have had during COVID-19 and the longer term detriment to their health if they have had it. So Rob, what is post-COVID-19 syndrome?
Look, COVID is a really complex issue, and it's a really complex disease, and it's been with us at least in the public domain, at least for the last 18 to 20 months, although in 2019 there have been sporadic reports of the disease being located and genetically being identified. I guess in early 2020 was when it really hit the pages and started to disseminate very quickly. It's been a very dynamic disease. It's like most viruses, it changes all the time. And the fact that it's now infecting at least 200 million and possibly more than 1 billion people on the planet, it's 1.5 billion, it sets up an environment where it becomes prime, if you like, for mutation. And so this creates all kinds of challenges. It's a virus and it attacks the immune system or stimulates a powerful immune response. It's a very individualized response. People respond to the disease differently. Some people are asymptomatic. Up to 80 to 90% of folk who get it are totally asymptomatic. And yet another, somewhere around about 0.5% of people die. So the range of responses are really complex, and the systems that it affects, ranging from lung infection, which is where the virus initially arrives through aerosolized contact, and then dissemination through the bloodstream to the major organs of the body, and then you get organ failure and all the traditional signs that you get with sepsis and septic shock. There is no treatment that we know of. It's basically still supportive. So supplemental oxygen and cardiovascular support. These are the only two ways that we know to make patients better. And we stimulate their immune system if we can. And this is what vaccines and such do. The problem, of course, with vaccines, and the biggest challenge with them, is that you're chasing a moving target. And that is that the original COVID that we started out with in the beginning of 2020 is still alive and well, but it's been superseded by the Alpha variant and then the Delta variant, of course. And interestingly, there have been thousands of mutations of the original COVID disease, but not all of them have sort of moved progressively forward. The Alpha and the Delta have become more contagious, and as yet we still even don't know what the mortality associated with these two variants are. We suspect some of the early data said that they were less dangerous, so they had a lower mortality, but much more contagious. But the number in terms of the contagion of the Alpha was about 50 times as contagious as the original COVID. But the Delta is approximately 1,000 times. So this is why Delta is causing such an enormous response now. But if you look at the history of infectious diseases, and there's a lot of well-documented, well-covered work on the CDC and CDC allied websites, what you see is these viral infections, and they occur every year annually. They come in waves, and they have explosions and then recede explosions, then recede explosions, then recede. For example, the 1918 flu basically had 3 great waves, 4 great waves, and then disappeared, basically became endemic. Now we're trusting that the same thing will happen here with this COVID disease, because the precedent, of course, was in 2003 when the SARS epidemic hit Hong Kong, and that was put China on a red alert. And I was involved in that. Our devices were brought in to China and approved to actually deal with these infectious diseases in advance. So we've had a lot of experience with this, and but it petered out, if that's the right way to put it. And of course, the more dangerous it is, is the greater the install base. And at the moment, we can imagine or expect that somewhere around about 1 billion or 2 billion people will have had unconfirmed antibodies related to COVID infection. It was last week, I think, some amazing information came out from India, and they did testing across a number of provinces or states in India. And what they found was that something like 67% of randomly chosen people of various ages had COVID Delta antibodies. So that means two-thirds of the population of India have been infected and had contact or been vaccinated. So it's a terrifyingly widespread disease. It's common, contagious, and sometimes fatal, and it's dynamic. So it's got all of the challenging features of a clinical disease that we still haven't resolved. We haven't resolved how we live with it, how we'll deal with it.
And what sort of like the long-term symptoms have you seen in relation to people who have tested positive for COVID-19?
Well, again, it's a very personal disease because, and you know, it's interesting. One of the big things in medicine now is about precision medicine, and what that does is says that most people have different compositions, different immune systems, different biochemical communicators, messaging systems. And so if you catch the same dose of a virus that I catch, it's unlikely that we'll express the same symptoms. You might get it more seriously than me. I may not get it seriously at all. I may, though, have long-term sequels to it. And this is the interesting thing about COVID, as we know now. These long COVIDs and post-COVID syndromes are the persistence of symptoms after the initial infectious period. It's sort of like 1 week or 3 or 4 days to 3 or 4 weeks. And these are persistent, ongoing, systemic symptoms, which include cognitive impairment, drowsiness, pain, headaches, all kinds of difficult to identify symptoms, but they are obviously real and they do persist. And they're not related. And it's interesting that folk who have asymptomatic initial COVID infections can have very serious post-COVID disease. And so it's easy to ask the questions. It's very, very difficult to give comprehensive answers. And we can see this at the moment. We've got 7.5 billion world experts on COVID, but the people who actually know about COVID don't know very much at all. It's a dynamic field. It's changing all the time. But I think the message is really clear, and that is we have to learn to live with infectious diseases. And, you know, I remember being asked about COVID very early on, and my sort of response was, it's not so much COVID-19 that worries me, it's COVID 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. And these are the things that going forward, we're going to have to deal with as a community. There is no doubt COVID's changed the way we live. It's changed the way we do business, and it's changed geopolitics. Been incredibly impactful. And it's been, if you like, a salutary lesson in how to better coordinate and better work together rather than to alienate and fight against each other. It should be a unifying force. And, you know, to me, this is kind of where Uscoms are a part of what we do. The concept of medical diplomacy is absolutely critical. We are no longer nationally divided. We're universally united in the sense that the disease knows no national boundary, nor religious or whatever. We all get it in the end, and nobody's responsible for it. It's a disease and there will be others after it. So we need to coordinate, work together better, and have a concerted strategy going forward with how to deal with them.
You said that, I mean, that's interesting. You mentioned cognitive impairment. I've read that there's been a study that there's been some effect of cognitive impairment, even with people who had no symptoms. What about like heart disease or lung disease? Have you seen any of that?
One of the big deals, Uscom specialises in technologies which measure pulmonary function and cardiovascular function. And it's interesting because the COVID's actually an infectious disease of the lungs, but which is complicated systematically with immune responses, very complex immune responses. So our patients actually don't die from the infection. Most of them die from cardiovascular failure, which is a response of the septic infection. So our devices basically measure non-invasively lung function and cardiovascular function. We're the world leaders, and we're recommended by the Chinese National Health and Medical Commission as the preferred method to measure, to manage severe COVID, because we can rapidly identify the changes in the circulation which precipitate death and direct therapy appropriately and accurately. So our device has been really at the centre of COVID, especially acute COVID and early COVID, and we've now been involved in the establishment of more than 50 infectious disease centres in China. And these are the kinds of sort of social activities that we're going to have to start looking at. We are going to have to set up infectious disease specialised centres so that we can deal with these periodic outbreaks. And it's been an interesting part to be involved in that process. The second phase now are these sort of long COVID, post-COVID symptoms. And one of the consequences are that you get cardiovascular and pulmonary fibrosis because it's an infection. The response to infection is fibrosis often, but particularly in the lungs. So many of these folk we're finding now at the end of 3 months have restrictive physiology. Their breath, their capacity to breathe is diminished. And so what we need to do is monitor these folk. And we don't know how long this will go for. Will this condition get worse and worse and people die in 12 or 18 months? Or will they resolve and heal and recover? There is no longitudinal study. This is real-time science, and it shouldn't be complicated with politics. This is about people and survival. And we need to take it seriously. We need to look at it carefully. And there is an awful lot of work that's going to need to be done. The evidence at the moment is still confounding. We know it's an infectious disease. We know it's dangerous. It's contagious and sometimes fatal, sometimes asymptomatic. We don't understand why. Are different races protected? America was hit absolutely terribly, even though they've got the highest health spend in the world. Why is that? These are questions that we need to know. And why, say, has China's been such a very low level of infection? It's not all just about management and control. You would want to look at the genetic components or causes associated with these things worldwide. So there's a huge amount of information that we need to understand. And it's not just for COVID, it's understanding the foundations of infectious diseases and the consequences that it's going to have for us all going forward.
That's really interesting. And it's really exciting to see your products and their saturation in the Chinese market. One comment I make is it seems like China's a little bit ahead of us because the Australian government's still dealing with vaccines. We've not actually moved into the development of infectious disease centres, but I'm sure it will come. I just really
China
want to
has
know.
vaccinated over 1 billion people.
Yes.
1.1 billion people.
Yeah. So I think, in some respects we should learn from their experience. Tell me how did you break into the Chinese market? I'm sure there's lots of companies listening. How do you go about doing that?
Look, there is no simple answer. It's time, persistence and focus. It's like any other market. We went to China, as I said, on the wave of SARS, and we stayed there because clinicians there were very interested in what we were doing. I've been lecturing there for 15 odd years, attached to the universities there, some of the universities there. We've now set up a wholly owned subsidiary in Beijing. I spend maybe 4 to 6 months of the year here. It's understanding the system, working with the regulators, and having relationships. So we've got a board member who's a Beijing-based member, and our Director of International Operations has had an established history in health management in Beijing, so knows a lot of people, Teresa Go, and I think those things help. You do need to have an interface with the community and understand. I think China's been a sort of object of many sort of social invasions, and I think, we need to work together is really what it's about. If you go there and you make contributions, and I think the last 5-year plan identified that China needed entrepreneurs, medical academics, and bioscience. So our company ticks all those boxes from my point of view, from an academic point of view, from the entrepreneurial side of things. And our biosciences, we've got something like 20 or 30 registered IP components in China. So, it's like any other market. You look at what's necessary, you make some assessments of it, you don't get it always right, and you persist, I think is the way to do it. But you do need to have partners, and you do need to work with those people.
I think that's a good answer. I mean, my experience with working with businesses in China, it's very much about relationships.
Sure.
Building that trusted relationship.
Well, I think that's universal, Alison.
Sorry?
It doesn't matter where you. I think that's universal. No matter where you go, business to be successful, you need to have good relationships and partnerships. And I think that's a global message and a national message and a geopolitical message, and that is, we work together, we recognise each other's differences, but we respect and collaborate. That's a very powerful tool that is a good foundation for trade and cooperation and commerce.
What are some of the challenges you experienced in terms of a regulatory approval for a medical device and intellectual property, political, etc., dealing with China?
Well, look, intellectual property is always sort of identified as a defect in the Chinese system. And I think you've got to give credit that they haven't come in the last sort of 200 years from the Westminster system and the development of concepts of IP. It's really only been the last 10, 15 years where they've actually been in that international domain where IP is recognised. They have taken amazing steps to regulate and normalise, standardise, and develop an IP system that's analogous to that we consider in the West to be the right way. And they've done huge efforts to that. And I previously didn't take much time with IP in China because it was very difficult to prosecute, expensive to defend. Now that's totally different. You can actually prosecute IP successfully. You can defend trademarks and copyrights. So I think it's a much more comfortable environment, IP, now than it has ever been, and it's continuing to develop. So I think that's an important thing. The regulatory environment is always catastrophic. And I say that it's just regulators, more and more regulators. When you're in a small company, we're regulated the same way as BHP and Rio are. And if we go to China, we're regulated the same way as GE and Phillips. This is the way life works. And China have developed a regulatory environment, which again is parallel and not much different to US, Europe, and Australia for that matter. So there's nothing unique. It's all about process, and it's about management and control and regulation. Medicine's important and consequential and has impacts if it doesn't work. So being regulated is probably painful, but in some respects necessary. And we accept that. we follow the path. It always takes longer, costs more than you could ever imagine, and they always find the most difficult questions to ask you. That's life.
Tell me about how you, I mean, I think a lot of people on the call would be a bit jealous of you, but how did you manage to obtain the endorsement of the Chinese government?
Look, I think you just go there and you understand what happens in the environment. As I said, the 5-year plan recommends academic, entrepreneurial and bioscience as the areas that they need most. And they will do whatever to encourage you to go there, to set up, to manufacture, to develop. I collaborate and write papers with a number of different institutions in China, academic institutions. I'm a professor at a couple of places, one place there and one place in Australia. And I lecture maybe 20 times a year there. So it's not as if you just sort of walk in and say, look, I'm going to tell you people what to do. They've got an incredibly complex and increasingly developed medical system. If we look around the world 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were established leaders who could sit and sort of evaluate everybody else. I think many of the places in Southeast Asia, with their improved economic development, have had an accompanying improvement in the standards of education and medical practice. And that is continuing. There is a fixation on doing things better, and that will reach a point where their standards are very much to be admired, not to sort of to be challenged.
So to get that, was there a competitive process, or is it just that they recognised you? Do you make an application?
We've been there, we've worked hard, and we've made contributions that were valuable. And I think that's always important, and that's the same in any market that you move into. We sort of comply with local, provincial and national government expectations. That's what you would do in Australia. State laws, federal laws, it's easy. And you contribute to the system. I think people do recognise that. I think in China, they are very much about encouraging what they see as the right direction. And so we got our AAA commercial rating. We got our high torch national high-tech enterprise listing, which means we're a company of high technical recognised capability nationally. To us, that's a really important thing, and it's a part of developing IP. It's contributing clinically in terms of saving lives, developing infectious disease outposts. We do an awful lot in this in China, and those things you don't ask for, but people do notice that you do that after a while.
And placing your medical devices into the Chinese hospital, was that through tender, or how was that arranged?
Look, there isn't an easy way to work out distribution in China, in the US, in Europe. Every system, every country, every province, every state, every hospital does it differently. Everybody would love a simple formula. You just have one person, give them a call, give them your information, show them your data, and people will make assessments on the basis of science. That would suit me perfectly. It doesn't always work like that. So you use whatever pathways are available. We use a sort of sub-distribution network and also part direct distribution. Direct distribution when you're a small company is very, very difficult, very expensive and hard to manage. So we use sub-distributors to get our work done. But we do also keep in touch at a state and national level with regard to tenders and compliance to tenders to make sure that we do everything right. Same as you do in Australia, I guess.
And what do you see as the opportunities post-COVID-19 in Australia and China going forward?
Look, it's terrifying, actually. There's two components, say, from Uscom's point of view. One is the Uscom 1A, which is the cardiovascular monitoring technology, which allows you to identify abnormalities in the circulation, which may ultimately lead to death, and to choose the appropriate intervention, whether it's fluid, inotropes, or vasoactives. But you can do it within 5 or 10 minutes. And that's fantastic. And that's why it's adopted. We're in 5 of the top 10 paediatric hospitals in the US, and we'll be in 7 of the top 10 paediatric hospitals in the US, principally for management of sepsis. This is our bread and butter. But it's also for heart failure. It's also for hypertension, preeclampsia. So we see the expanded focus, and China are very systematic about this. They've identified that infectious disease is going to be something big going forward, and they need to deal with it. They are setting up infectious disease hospitals all over the place. And they will be, for each year, whatever comes along, whatever next year's infectious disease is, they will still deal with it in this systematic, networked way. We will be a part of that. Now, the post-COVID stuff, and hopefully Australia will get to that in a few years' time, and maybe the US. Europe are starting to do it already. So these will open doors for us going forward. Post-COVID, with these pulmonary infections, you want to see what happens to these people's lungs and how you best treat them. We don't know what the natural history of the disease is yet. We don't know what the outcomes are going to be, and we don't know what the best therapies are. The first step in that process is accurately monitoring the changes in pulmonary function that may suggest, and I think that the data says somewhere about 12 to 17% of folk who have serious COVID have pulmonary fibrosis at the end of 3 months. Now that's very unhealthy. What we know about pulmonary fibrosis is it's not a good disease to have. It's difficult to reverse, but it may be different. The COVID pulmonary fibrosis may be different to other pulmonary fibrosis. We don't know. So home monitoring is going to be really important, pulmonary home monitoring. We've just released a new technology, which is cloud-based, app-mediated, totally wireless, induction charged. You just blow in it. It measures very precisely using high fidelity digital ultrasound. It automatically communicates to your phone in your pocket, your app. That communicates to your local doctor who has all of your medical records there. He looks at that and says, look, you're not looking too good, try this, and then do another one. So that kind of telehealth at an integrated level is really powerful. And I think that's one of the great things about this COVID thing. And that is, it has made us suddenly start to evaluate the opportunities associated with telehealth. And these are the kind of things that allow us to deal with, say, 2 billion people who've had COVID, who may have ongoing pulmonary fibrosis. So it's changing the way that we approach systems. And we expect this to be this new device, which is the world-leading technology in this space, will be adopted very rapidly in China and become quite widespread, as well as in Europe. It's already started, and we're just about to get our approvals in the US. So from our point of view, it's probably the ideal space for a medical technology company to be. You're confronted with a global health dilemma, and you have the solutions that improve that and improve care, save people's lives. That's what we do. That's what we seek out.
It's interesting, and I agree completely that e-health is an opportunity, but also from what you were saying, that China's investing in their infectious disease centres. So anyone who provides services to those centres, whether it's PPE or consulting staff or medical services, there's opportunities there as well. Another thing that I picked up from what you were saying is how your equipment sort of monitors for potentially, pre-eclampsia, those sort of conditions, or sepsis. It would be really interesting, because you're in China, so many people are using your equipment. Are you collecting data for research purposes?
I collaborate with people that I work with, so we look at data. We can The use of cloud-based data is ideal, but there are a whole lot of challenges worldwide. So to set up a sort of a data center where you just acquire everybody's clinical measures, there are all kinds of ethical, social, and legal complications with that. I've never understood why your health was less important than your privacy, but that's a social issue, not a personal one. If I get sick, I would like my clinician to have every bit of my medical background to make a more informed decision about whether I'm well or not well and what I'm previously been on and how I've responded to it, or if I'm allergic to any kind of drug or medication. It will come, but I think it's a slow thing. But I think at the front line of that whole process is high quality digital analytic measures. And we measure the central health parameters, if you like, of cardiovascular pulmonary. And these are systems which are responsible for about 75 to 80% of global mortality. So our devices assist in the treatment and the management of diseases that are responsible for 75% to 80% of all global mortality. How we organise that and we then supply that and feed that into software is really not difficult. It's the hardware at the front end that's really hard. That'll take 15 years to do. The software in the middle, you can pay someone $10,000 and they'll come up with a beautifully integrated solution and a lovely graphical interface, and it will display it. But unless the measures that you have at the front end are high fidelity, high accuracy, and they deal with hearts, lungs, and vessels, it's not going to be of high clinical value. And that's really where I see the future going. But I think it's going to be a social collaboration with people like Google, Apple, etc. And we're already working with these companies. We're on the International Space Station. We are doing research with the big tech companies. They need front ends that are high fidelity and have high clinical yield. So it's an exciting time for medicine, and we're an exciting place for that. And China's our sort of our main beach stone, if you like. It's a place that we've worked at and been encouraged and have been successful in. It's a good time, and it's a good time to have things that help communities and help people.
It's great, and it's a wonderful success story for an Australian business, and we're so lucky to have you today for me to ask you questions. Does anyone else want to post any questions in the Q&A? I have, in relation to, for Rob, in relation to the data, obviously there are privacy laws that protect our personal information, but it is possible to aggregate de-identified data, and I just think your company would be a wonderful resource where we can find, you said, 12 to 17% of serious cases go on to have, pulmonary complications. So that statistic itself can be used in developing treatments or trends, and using AI to be able to identify trends so that clinicians can better treat people.
So much work needs to be done, Alison, and
yeah.
I guess from the point of clinical medicine, that's exciting because we are learning more daily and we have the tools which will give us the opportunities to look into the future.
Yeah, and as you said, personalised medicine, being able to target treatments for different populations, etc. That's really what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, why does someone get COVID, doesn't even notice it, and someone else dies? I have no idea.
And if we work that out, we know who to focus on, don't we?
Well, the earlier we work out who to focus on, the better, I think.
I'm going to interview Owen next, and then hopefully we'll get some Q&A at the end. But thank you so much for answering those questions. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I think Australia is really supportive of businesses such as yours being so successful, not only in China but internationally. But I personally thank you for all the work that you've done to help treat people with COVID-19. I think that's a community contribution. So I think, you know, with the frontline workers, I think businesses like you should be thanked for the work that you were doing in terms of making better outcomes for patients. I'm going to ask some questions for Owen now. We've got a little bit of time, so I do want to get the questions in for him. Owen, can you tell me about Morrison Innovations technology and what it does?
Sure. Thanks, Alison. Actually, first of all, I'd like to thank ACBC to give us this opportunity to in this conversation with our old friend Rob. So actually, we're old friends. I visit Uscom's office and understand the cutting edge technology actually way before COVID. And then I really echo with Rob that actually the post-COVID opportunities and challenges, like in terms of, not only the geopolitical issues, but also like regulatory compliance, IP, e-health. Actually, I think we have a lot of, common, topics I think that we can do in the following events with ACBC. And then these challenges actually are not only limited in China, but also I think in Australia recently that, see how the regulatory dilemma and then, in our own vaccine rollout, I think it's not only one country thing, but also to the whole world. So just to conclude that most importantly, we just want to work together, unite, coordinate. And I think I really echo with Rob that after all, business is all about relationship and trust. So without this foundation, nothing happens. Okay, and go back to Alison's question. So Morrison Innovations have been promoting value-based healthcare via our unique medtech pathway solutions since 2017. This solution is actually to accelerate Australian R&D by bringing the contract development and manufacturing CDMO solutions, plus venture capital, plus go-to-market execution, all together under the same umbrella. So in 2019, we transformed a GMP mobile assembly line in Shenzhen into a ISO 13485 medical device prototyping and pilot production facility. That's where we started. Our hard work and solutions soon being paid back by the soaring PPE needs, firstly from China and then globally in 2020. So we quickly attract private investment in establishing HygieMed Australia. So under this brand, so we design high quality and innovative PPEs from the expertise based in Brisbane, Sydney, and Adelaide to respond to the unmet needs due to the COVID. Then we manufacture in Shenzhen, and now with our supply chain and our business partners from Guangzhou, Xiamen, Hefei, Kaohsiung, Japan, and Malaysia. So now we are distributing nationwide, exporting to Southeast Asia, Pacific nations, and then we are negotiating OEM for global distributors such as Aspen Medical and CH2. Our business aligned with the OS industry and the MPP Connect identified megatrend, healthy aging and value-based healthcare in 2020. So actually, we've been advocate for the value-based healthcare since 2017, way ahead of the MPP Connect, because we realized the current funding model and our commercialization model probably needs some systematically change to be able to be more competitive. We are committed to invest into the Australian R&D and bring more quality medical devices into the global market, focus on cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases. Actually, we invested a seed funding another technology to probably trying to achieve the same effect of Uscom. Probably we can be Uscom 2.0, but hopefully not taking another 20 years. So that's our goal. So that's what we did, and then we really also interested into IVF, precise medicine, as we talked about. We look forward to working with more Australian medtech companies such as Uscom and scale up our capacity with our unique medtech pathways to accelerate the commercialization progress. Thank you.
So tell me about your experience with dealing with China supplying. I think you supply PPE into China, yes?
Yes, actually, the current product we commercialize is PPE, but actually we have at least 4 projects under the line. Yeah.
So what are they? Masks or what are they exactly?
No. As I mentioned, actually, also like we invest into wearables. Like precise medicine. Yes, so that and then we're looking into the IVF. Associated products and services, so that we are so probably Hajime is a very successful story. So everyone say you're the PPE guy, but this is definitely one of our success story. But we do want to work with the medtech community and bring more medical devices into the market, as we understand. Australia really have a very, very good early stage R&D capacity, but currently the transformation or the commercialization process, I think, is just a bit too long, so the cost too high, so that and then end up with that hard to scale up. Yeah.
So, like, Rob, do you have business partners in China, and how's the relationship? How did you build that relationship with businesses in China?
I think that is it. The question goes to Rob.
No, it's for you. How did you build your business in China?
Yes, I think that my story is much more simpler because I grew up in China. I get families, colleagues, previous colleagues, friends, so that and then we just based on my personal experience, I work with a lot of for example, MyRay, so that I work with them for quite a long time and know their stories well.
And it's useful to have that background. So what do you see as the challenges and opportunities for other Australian businesses in Australia and China post-COVID-19?
Sure. I think actually, from my perspective, the opportunities are obvious. There will be big investments into R&D and clinical trials. The medical device and pharmaceutical industry actually boomed during the pandemic, and many manufacturers like we partnered with, they find out, the gross margin is much higher than the electric products they used to manufacture. In the meantime, I think now the Chinese manufacturers also realize actually there are gaps between their R&D capacity and the market expectations, especially from the Western country. There are also big gaps in expertise in the compliance, regulatory, and global market entry. So these gaps will see more Chinese pharmaceutical and medical devices companies invest heavily into R&D, new product development, and clinical trials to bring high quality products into the global market. So the absolute dollars are expected to be outpaced the US for the first time in the following 3 to 5 years. This investment is a great opportunity for Australian medtech companies to fill in the market, especially as I mentioned in the cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases, IVF, precise medicine, and digital health. So that's the opportunity I see. Also the challenges I think is also obvious. The biggest challenges I can see is the travel and the communication cost will be very high. As I think that Rob can also add a lot of stories into that. Now travel to China, so I think at least 2 or 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's really interesting, Rob. I mean, you've been traveling to China during COVID-19 for business. Do you want to talk a bit about, you said that you're on a diet of cold chicken feet. Let's talk about that. What's it like currently living in Chengdu? Has
Rob,
the city and country been vaccinated?
Yeah, you're in mute.
And what is life like on the other side day to day as we're currently in lockdown in Sydney?
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting because I think my retirement plan is to write a consumer's guide to quarantining around the world. And Owen's particularly correct, and that is it has just sort of filled the world with quicksand as far as travel and communication goes. You know, we all Zoom and we do that kind of stuff, but the reality is that business is made on face-to-face meetings and being in place and spending time there. You can't condense it to a 30-minute communication. 3 weeks full quarantine is a long, long time. You know, you start to lose body mass, you start to get isolated, all kinds of things happen to you. But yeah, I've done the 2 weeks in Australia and I spent time in Singapore, and everybody's got a slightly different way to do it. And I must say, I do prefer the Singapore method where you go along, you put your thumb in and they say, welcome back, Professor Phillips, and you go through, you get your PCR done and you go home. And they send you a result in 3 hours. It says your PCR is negative, go about your business. And if you're not, then they send you to hospital, you know. But I think with the increasing complexity with vaccinations and infections and the high level of negativity in some of these reliable tests that we previously had, they're sensitive only for previous versions or previous forms of COVID. So, for example, you know, vaccinations now are becoming less effective on different variants because they were devised for other variants. So it's going to become very difficult to keep this formulaic, you will stay for 3 weeks until you don't have symptoms. I don't know where it's going to end up, to tell you the truth, but I can tell you at the moment it's really difficult because most countries don't want other people going there. So they make it very difficult for you to get visas. They make it very difficult for you to travel. You've got to do incredible prerequisites. And then when you arrive, you've got to be locked up for 2 or 3 weeks. It's just very difficult to do business. It will be a delight. I remember when I could be sitting having lunch in Sydney at the head office and decide that I'd go to Beijing and I'd be on the plane at 9 o'clock and in the office at 7:30 in the morning. I'd walk straight through because of the APEC card. I'd walk straight through, no sort of migration or anything. And I think of those days and think, well, wow, I wish they'd come back again. But we will see. Over the next 12 months, I think we're going to have to take very pragmatic decisions. Do we stay connected? Do we travel? Is international business a priority? How do we maintain it? It's got to open up somehow or other. And I'm looking forward to that every day.
I think that's a good way to finish the session, and I would like to very much thank Rob and Owen sharing your insight. I certainly learned a lot today, and I hope that the people that have joined us on the call will. The session has been recorded, and I would like to let you know that we do have another session coming up for the ACBC health and ageing subgroup. We've got a health summit on the 7th of September, which will be a hybrid event. Please join us for that. And the ACBC will be sending an event poll to provide feedback. Oh, look, she's provided the polling at the end. Please complete this feedback form to help us plan for future events. But I thought that this was absolutely fantastic, and I do commend Rob and Owen and your organisations for what you've been doing. Personally, I have a big passion in supporting Australian business succeed everywhere. It's so exciting to see, and we wish you every success in the future. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks.
Bye.